And so this creation in Christ Jesus, this new birth in Him that brings with it all the other fruits of salvation, all the other parts, culminates. It apexes. This is the pinnacle, as it were, as far as the Christian life on this earth is concerned, and even into eternity. It culminates in good works. It culminates in holiness. It culminates in a perfect conformity to Jesus Christ as a perfect servant of the Most High God. Created to serve God. The more a believer is motivated by grace, the more they will enjoy what they do for God. Our problem is often that we begin to be focused more on guilt. That happens. I need to do this because I've done this. I've broken this commandment, therefore I need to do this. But that's not the right motivation. It's not out of guilt, it's out of grace. And by beholding the grace of God, always remembering we are His workmanship, He's working in me, all of free grace, all of His mercy, that is what enables the Apostle Paul to say such things as these. In Romans 1, you remember what he calls himself? Romans 1 verse 1, a servant of Jesus Christ. The word is really a bondslave, one who's been purchased to be a slave of Jesus Christ. Now, when Paul says that, he says it with the utmost joy. Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ. Because as we know from Ephesians 2, he used to be a slave of Satan. All of us are a slave to one thing or the other. And Paul used to be a slave of Satan, and yet he's able to say in Romans 1, when he begins, he's beginning to start to write about the greatest message ever communicated. The gospel of grace. And this is his prime work, as it were, if we were to consider it that way. His magnum opus, as people would think of it. His chief work, Romans. And he begins by highlighting grace. Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ. And I'm glad to be a slave. That's the thing. That's the joy this morning. He says in 2 Corinthians 4, he uses this title. In 1 Corinthians 4, 1 Corinthians 4. Let a man so account of us as the ministers of Christ. The ministers of Christ. And the word translated ministers there really has the idea of being a under-rower, an oarsman. And back in these days, because we're a bit removed from this now, you know they had ships that were powered by rowing. And so there was, as it were, a galley of slaves. We've heard those terms before, I think. The galley slaves, they would be in the very bottom of the ship. And each man has his oar, and maybe a man sitting next to him with that oar, depending on the size of the ship. And Paul says of himself that I'm a minister of Christ. I'm an under-rower. That's all I am. I'm an oarsman. That's the job of a slave. And I'm happy to do it for Jesus Christ. I'm happy to just be an under-rower. I'm happy to not be seen as a captain of the ship. I'm happy to not be directing everyone else. I'm just an under-rower. And if Paul could say that with all the things that he did for the Lord, surely you and I can